My parents accused me of stealing my nephew after I raised him for years, until my sister demanded custody back. I broke down and said, "You abandoned a child who called me dad, and now you want to pretend I was the one who took him." I never thought I would have to explain to my own parents that you cannot steal a child who was left on your couch with a backpack, 2 pairs of socks, and a note saying you would be back in a few days. That was the part that kept going through my head after everything started falling apart. I was standing in my kitchen one Tuesday night, looking at my sister across the table, while my parents sat behind her like they had come to collect something that belonged to them. My nephew was upstairs doing homework. He had no idea that the adults downstairs were arguing about whether I had spent the last 6 years raising him or kidnapping him. My sister had come back into our lives after being gone for years, and she wanted custody immediately. My parents were calling me selfish, controlling, and dishonest because I would not simply hand him over. They kept using the word stealing. Every time I heard it, I felt something inside me twist, because stealing implied that I had taken him. I had never taken him. I had taken care of him. There is a difference, and I did not understand how much that difference mattered until I was forced to prove it. My nephew was 8 years old when my sister left him with me. He is 14 now. At 8, he was small enough that his feet did not touch the floor when he sat at my kitchen table. At 14, he is almost as tall as I am. His voice has started changing. He complains about algebra. He keeps forgetting to put his dishes in the dishwasher. He has a collection of battered basketball shoes by the back door and a habit of opening the refrigerator 3 times in a row while insisting there is nothing to eat. I knew what cereal he hated. I knew which side of the bed he slept on. I knew what time he needed to leave for school. I knew that when he got overwhelmed, he needed a few minutes alone before talking. I knew all of that because I was there. My sister was not. That was the part nobody seemed to want to acknowledge. My sister, Rachel, had always been unpredictable. She was 3 years younger than me, and growing up, she had a way of making every crisis seem like an emergency that someone else needed to solve. If she forgot to pay a bill, my mom handled it. If she lost a job, my dad called someone he knew. If she got into debt, everybody blamed the circumstances. I was the older brother, which apparently meant I was expected to absorb some of the consequences whenever she made another bad decision. When her son was born, I tried to stay out of it. I loved him immediately, but I knew he was not my child. Rachel was with a guy she had been dating for less than a year when she got pregnant. That relationship ended before my nephew was born. Afterward, she bounced between jobs, apartments, and relationships. There were periods when she seemed to be doing well. Then there would be some new problem. She would miss work. She would run out of money. Her utilities would get shut off. My parents would step in. I started noticing that my nephew spent more and more time at my parents' house. Then he started spending weekends with me. I did not think much of it at first. I was single, working full-time, and living in a modest 3-bedroom house that I had bought after saving for years. I had a spare room. My nephew liked coming over because I let him stay up later than my parents did. We played video games. We made terrible frozen pizzas. I helped him with reading. Nothing about it felt like I was becoming his parent. It just felt like I was his uncle. The first time Rachel asked me to keep him for a few days, she arrived late at night. I remember the weather, because it was raining hard enough that the gutters were overflowing. She had 2 bags with her. She told me she needed to straighten out some things. I did not ask many questions. I was annoyed but not suspicious. She seemed exhausted. She was crying. My nephew was half asleep in the back seat. She carried his backpack inside, set it near the stairs, and told me she would be back after the weekend. I told her that was fine. Sunday came. She did not come back. She texted me that she needed a little longer. I told her okay. Monday came. She said she had found a place to stay but needed another week. I said okay again. A week turned into another week, then another. My nephew started asking when he was going home. I told him his mom was dealing with some things and that he would stay with me until she got settled. That was the first time I realized I was not dealing with a normal temporary babysitting situation. I called my mother. She told me Rachel was struggling and that I should not make things harder. My father said I was doing the right thing by keeping things stable. That became the phrase everyone used, keep things stable, so I did. I enrolled my nephew in the school near my house after we discussed it with his mother. I took him to the doctor. I bought his clothes. I attended parent conferences. I signed school forms wherever his mother authorized me to do so. I made sure his lunches were packed. I learned how to braid a friendship bracelet because he wanted to make one for a girl in his class and got embarrassed when he could not figure it out. I attended his school plays. I sat through 3-hour baseball tournaments where he only played for 20 minutes. I paid for summer camp when his mother said she would reimburse me. She never did. I did not keep track of every dollar at first. That changed later. For the first couple of years, I genuinely believed Rachel would eventually get herself together. There were moments when she would appear. She would spend an afternoon with him. She would take him out for ice cream. She would promise that things were getting better. Then she would disappear again. My nephew stopped asking when she was coming home. That scared me more than anything. Around the time he turned 10, he started calling me dad without thinking about it. The first time happened in the grocery store. He was standing beside the cart, arguing with me about whether we needed cereal when he got distracted and called me dad. He froze. I froze. Then he looked embarrassed. I told him it was okay. I did not make a big deal out of it. Later that night, I cried in my bedroom for reasons I could not explain. I loved him, but loving him did not mean I wanted him confused about who his parents were. I told him he could call me whatever felt natural, and I never pushed him toward one name or another. Eventually, he started using dad more often. I never told anyone to stop him. I also never coached him to say it. That distinction would become important because years later, my sister would tell people that I had manipulated her son into believing I was his father. At the time, I thought that was impossible. I was wrong about a lot of things during those years. Mostly, I was wrong about how temporary the situation was. I also trusted people too much. I trusted my parents when they said Rachel was trying. I trusted Rachel when she promised she would come around more often. I trusted myself to handle everything without formalizing it. That was my biggest mistake. I never went to court. I never pursued formal guardianship. I never demanded child support. I never even seriously discussed custody with a lawyer. I kept thinking that if I made everything official, it would somehow make the situation more hostile. I thought my sister would eventually become stable enough that none of that would matter. Then my nephew turned 12. By then, he had lived with me longer than he had lived anywhere else. His school records listed my house as his residence. His teachers knew me. His pediatrician knew me. His coaches knew me. His friends knew me. His life was here. My sister still existed on the edges of it. She would disappear for months and then show up with gifts. She started dating a new man. For a while, she seemed happy. She talked about getting her life together. She said she wanted to be a better mother. I supported that. I really did. I wanted my nephew to have a relationship with his mom. I encouraged him to call her. I made sure she had his school schedule. I sent her pictures. I invited her to birthdays. I even drove him to meet her for lunch sometimes because she said she could not always get to my side of town. Then she disappeared again. By the time he turned 13, my nephew had stopped expecting her to keep promises. That hurt him more than her absence itself. I remember one Christmas when she said she was coming over. He stayed awake until almost midnight. She did not come. I told him her car had probably broken down. I had no idea if that was true. He went upstairs without saying anything. I sat in the living room with the Christmas tree lights on and realized I had been lying to him for years because I did not know how to tell him the truth without making him hate his mother. I thought that was the hardest thing I would ever deal with. It was not even close. The first warning that something had changed came from my mother. It was a Sunday morning. I had just finished making pancakes when she called. She asked how my nephew was doing. That was normal. Then she started asking questions that did not feel normal. She wanted to know whether I had ever applied for new birth certificate. She asked whether I had ever changed his school records without his mother's permission. She asked whether I had added myself as a parent on any medical forms. I told her no. She got quiet. Then she said Rachel was upset about some things. I asked what things. She said Rachel felt like I had taken over her role as a mother. I almost laughed because the idea seemed ridiculous. Then I realized my mother was serious. She said Rachel believed I had made decisions that were not mine to make. I asked what decisions. My mother mentioned the school, the doctor, the sports teams, the fact that my nephew called me dad. I told her none of those things had been secret. Rachel had known about all of it. My mother said knowing about something was not the same as agreeing to it. I remember hanging up and standing in my kitchen with a spatula in my hand. I did not eat breakfast that morning. I sat at the table and started thinking about every year that had passed. I wondered if I really had crossed some line without realizing it. Maybe I had. Maybe I had become so used to being responsible for him that I stopped seeing myself as his uncle. I hated that thought. I also felt something else. Fear. Not fear that I had done something wrong. Fear that someone else was preparing to make a claim that could upend his life. 3 days later, I got a message from my sister. She wanted to meet. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near the shopping center. I had not seen her in person for several months. She looked different, more put together. She had a new job. She had a ring on her finger. She told me she was engaged. She also told me she wanted her son back. That was how she phrased it, back. I asked what she meant. She said she wanted him living with her full-time. I reminded her that he had been living with me full-time for years. She said that was exactly the problem. She said I had allowed something temporary to become permanent. She believed she was his mother and had the right to take him home. I asked whether she had a home. She said yes. I asked whether she had steady work. She said yes. I asked whether she had talked to him about this. She said she planned to. That was when I knew things were going to become serious. I asked what would happen with school. She said he would change schools. I asked what would happen with his sports. She said he could adjust. I asked what would happen with his friends. She said he would make new ones. Everything about the conversation made it clear that she was thinking about his life as something that could be packed into boxes. I asked why now. She said she was ready. I believed her, or at least I wanted to. I asked what her fiancé thought. She said he supported her. That answer bothered me, not because I had anything against him. I just knew he had never met my nephew for more than a few minutes. I told her I would not agree to an immediate move. She became angry. She said I had already had enough time. I told her the problem was that she had chosen not to be involved for years. She said she had never abandoned him. I reminded her that she had not seen him for most of the previous year. She said she had been rebuilding her life. I told her I respected that, but rebuilding your life did not erase what had happened to him. She walked out. I thought that was the end of the first stage. It was only the beginning. That night my father came over. He sat at my kitchen table and told me I was making a mistake. He said Rachel had changed. He said she was finally ready. He said I needed to give her a chance. I asked why that chance had to come at my nephew's expense. He said I was making this personal. I told him it was personal. I was the person who had been raising his grandson. He said I was his uncle, not his father. That sentence stayed with me. I did not argue. I simply asked what he thought would happen to my nephew if I handed him over immediately. My father said the boy would adjust. That word again. Adjust. Everybody kept talking about adjustment as if a 14-year-old could be moved from the only home he remembered and somehow experience it like changing classrooms. I started documenting everything after that, not because I wanted to fight my sister, because I was scared. I created a folder on my computer. I saved school records, medical records, receipts for clothes, sports fees, camp payments, copies of messages from Rachel, emails, bank transfers, anything that showed she knew where he was living and that I was providing for him. I went back through years of text messages. There were hundreds. Some were ordinary. Some were Rachel asking me if I could pick him up. Some were her thanking me. Some were her saying she was sorry she missed another birthday. Some included pictures. There were also messages where she referred to my house as home. She would tell him she was proud of him. She would tell me he was lucky to have me. Reading them made me angry, not because they were proof against her, because they showed me that she knew exactly what the situation was. She had not been confused. She had been comfortable. That realization made me sick. A week later, she hired a lawyer. I found that out when I received paperwork. That was the moment I stopped thinking this might be solved by a family meeting. The documents accused me of withholding her child. They suggested I had prevented her from establishing a relationship with him. They made it sound like she had repeatedly tried to regain custody and that I had blocked her. I read those pages 3 times. Then I called a lawyer of my own. My first meeting lasted almost 2 hours. I brought everything I had. The lawyer told me not to panic. That was easier said than done. She explained that the biggest issue was the child's best interests and the existing custodial arrangement. She also told me something that I did not want to hear. My lack of formal legal custody meant I was more vulnerable than I thought. I had been acting as his parent without having the paperwork that would have formally recognized that role. For years, I had assumed doing the right thing was enough. It was not. I had to prove what the right thing actually was. My lawyer told me not to confront my sister, not to threaten her, not to post anything online, not to tell relatives what I thought of her. She told me to communicate in writing and keep everything about my nephew's welfare. So I did. The problem was that my parents did not. They started calling relatives. I learned this because my aunt called me one night. She asked whether I had really refused to give my sister her own son. I was stunned. I asked what she had heard. She said my parents had told people I had become possessive and that I was keeping my nephew from his mother. I felt embarrassed. I had always tried to keep family disagreements private. Now people were discussing me at birthdays and cookouts. My aunt eventually admitted that she did not know what to believe. I told her I was not asking her to choose sides. I just asked her not to repeat things that she had not witnessed. A few days later, my nephew came home from school and asked why his grandparents were angry with me. I asked what he meant. He said he had heard from my mother that his mom might take him to live with her. I felt my stomach drop. I asked whether anybody had told him that directly. He said no. He had overheard a conversation when he was at my parents' house. That night I sat on the edge of his bed. He was old enough to understand that adults were fighting about where he should live. I did not tell him legal details. I did not criticize his mother. I told him nothing was his fault. He asked whether he had to choose. I told him no. He asked whether I wanted him to stay. I told him I wanted whatever was healthiest for him. Then he looked at me for a long time and asked what would happen if a judge said he had to leave. I did not know what to say. I told him we would deal with whatever happened. He started crying. That was the first time I saw how badly this was affecting him. After he went to sleep, I sat at my desk and stared at the folder I had created. For the first time, I understood that evidence was not just about winning. It was about making sure his voice was not buried under everybody else's version of events. The first court hearing was mostly procedural. There was no dramatic moment. No judge slammed a gavel. Nobody exposed a secret. There were lawyers, forms, deadlines, a lot of waiting. That was actually worse. The uncertainty followed me everywhere. I would be at work thinking about it. I would be grocery shopping and wonder whether I should buy 6 months of clothes in case everything changed. I started waking up at 3 in the morning. I tried not to let my nephew see how stressed I was. He noticed anyway. Teenagers are better at reading adults than people give them credit for. The court ordered a temporary arrangement while everything was evaluated. My nephew stayed with me. My sister got visitation. A family services professional was assigned to speak with everyone involved. The first time my nephew met with her privately, I was terrified. I did not know what he would say. I worried that all the years of living with me would somehow make him look coached. I worried that his attachment to me would be interpreted as evidence that I had pushed him away from his mother. When he came home afterward, he did not tell me what he had said. I respected that. A few weeks later, my sister started showing up more consistently. For the first time in years, she attended his baseball games. She came to school events. She took him out for lunch. At first, I was relieved. Then I noticed something. She was trying very hard to make up 6 years in a matter of weeks. My nephew appreciated the attention, but he was also uncomfortable. He told me he did not know what to call her anymore. He said calling her mom felt strange. That broke my heart. I told him he did not have to call anyone anything that made him uncomfortable. He asked whether that would hurt her. I told him her feelings were not his responsibility. That was something I had learned late. Children should not have to manage adults. The family evaluation continued. There were interviews, home visits, questions about school, questions about finances, questions about who had been responsible for medical decisions, questions about routines. My sister said she had always intended to reunify with him. She provided evidence that she had asked my parents for help with custody years earlier. That initially worried me. Maybe there really had been more to the story than I knew. I started looking more carefully at old messages. Then I found something I had forgotten. 6 years earlier, after my sister left my nephew with me, she had sent me a message saying she needed me to keep him for as long as necessary because she could not care for him at that time. There was no ambiguity. She had written that she was not in a position to raise him. I had saved the message because I thought I might need the information for school registration. I forwarded it to my lawyer. She told me it could matter. A few days later, I found another message. My sister had asked me to put my name on one of my nephew's school emergency forms because she would not be available. Then another. She had asked me to make his dentist appointment. Then another. She had thanked me for being his home. The messages were not proof that she had legally surrendered custody, but they were proof that she knew the reality. That distinction mattered. Then something unexpected happened. My father called me. He sounded angry. He said my lawyer was making things worse. I asked what he meant. He said Rachel had shown him documents about the case and that he was worried my nephew would testify against her. I asked why he thought that. He said my nephew had told him he wanted to stay with me. I asked whether my father had asked him that. There was a long silence. My father admitted he had. I was furious. I told him he had no business putting a 14-year-old in the middle of the custody case. He said he was only trying to understand what his grandson wanted. I told him adults asking children to take sides was exactly how children got hurt. We argued. It was probably the most openly angry I had ever been with my father. Afterward, I regretted raising my voice, but I did not regret the boundary. I stopped letting my nephew visit my parents without supervision until things settled down. That caused another family explosion. My parents said I was punishing them. I told them I was protecting him. They said I had become controlling. I said I was setting boundaries because every adult around him was behaving as if he were property. That was when my mother started crying. She said she had spent years trying to keep the family together. I told her I appreciated that. Then I asked whether keeping the family together meant pretending nothing had happened. She did not answer. The turning point came from something far less dramatic than I expected. It was a financial record. My sister had claimed that she had been financially supporting my nephew during the years he lived with me. She provided a list of payments she said she had made. The total sounded impressive. Then my lawyer compared it with my bank statements. Most of the payments were not child support. They were birthday gifts, occasional reimbursements, a couple of grocery transfers, a payment for a school activity. The amounts were inconsistent. When we added everything up, it covered only a tiny portion of his expenses. Again, that did not make her a bad person. It just made her claim less convincing. Then my lawyer found something else. My sister had changed the wording of her story. At first, she had said she believed my nephew was living with me temporarily. Later, she said she had repeatedly demanded that I return him. But the messages did not show repeated demands. They showed requests for help. They showed gratitude. They showed apologies. There was even a message from her saying she was relieved that he had such a stable place to live. I remember reading that sentence and feeling strangely sad. because it confirmed that she had known. She had known he was safe. She had known he was loved. She had also known she was not doing the parenting. The next court review was more serious. My lawyer presented the school records, medical history, financial records, messages, and testimony from people who had seen my nephew's life over the years. His pediatrician confirmed that I had taken him to appointments consistently. His school counselor described me as his primary caregiver. His coach confirmed I attended practices and games. A teacher explained that when my nephew struggled, I was the adult the school contacted. None of those people painted my sister as evil. They simply described what they had witnessed. That mattered. My sister's lawyer argued that being a good caregiver did not give me a legal right to replace a parent. That was true. I never argued otherwise. My position was that I had never tried to replace his mother. I had stepped in because she was not there. My nephew was eventually interviewed separately. I was not present. I never learned exactly what he said. I only learned the result later. He wanted to remain in my home. He wanted regular contact with his mother. He did not want to change schools. He did not want to move. He did not want anyone to be punished. He wanted everyone to stop fighting. That last part hurt the most, because all the adults had spent months talking about rights. He was asking for peace. The evaluator recommended that he remain with me under a formal custodial arrangement while my sister received structured visitation that could increase over time based on consistency. It was not a total victory. I did not want a total victory. I wanted stability. My sister disagreed. She became furious. She told relatives that I had manipulated the system. She said the only reason he wanted to stay was because I had raised him to fear her. I wanted to defend myself publicly. I almost did. My lawyer reminded me that responding emotionally would not help, so I said nothing. Then Thanksgiving arrived. This was the first major family holiday since the court proceedings began. My parents invited everyone. My sister was there. My nephew was there. The entire day felt tense. People kept avoiding eye contact. The turkey was dry. The mashed potatoes were cold. Nobody wanted to discuss the custody case. Then my sister started talking about how unfair everything was. She said she had lost her own son. She said everyone had decided she was a bad mother. She said I had taken advantage of her worst years. I tried to stay quiet. Then she started talking about how I had stolen him. I remember feeling something snap inside me. I had been patient for months. I had kept my mouth shut. I had let documents speak, but there are limits to how much shame a person can absorb before something finally comes out. I looked at her and said what I had been holding in for years. I told her she had abandoned a child who called me dad, and now she wanted to pretend I was the one who took him. The room went completely silent. I had never said it like that. I regretted saying it almost immediately, not because it was untrue, because my nephew was sitting there. I did not want him hearing the people he loved reduced to a sentence. He left the table. I followed him outside. He was crying. I apologized. I told him I should have handled it differently. He said he understood. Then he asked me whether I hated his mom. I told him no. I told him I was angry at what had happened. I told him there was a difference. He asked whether she still loved him. I said I believed she did. He asked whether loving him meant she had done a good job. I had no answer that would not hurt. So I told him that adults could love someone and still make terrible choices. He nodded. That night after everyone left, my mother stayed behind. She sat with me at the kitchen table. She told me she had been wrong. I did not expect that. She said she had spent years feeling guilty about Rachel. She thought that if she defended her enough, maybe she could somehow undo the past. She admitted that she had sometimes blamed me because it was easier than admitting her daughter had failed. That was hard to hear. I told her I had always wondered why she treated me like the problem. She said she was afraid of losing Rachel completely. I understood that. I did not forgive everything instantly, but I understood. My father took longer. He was still angry. He believed I had pushed the family too far. Eventually, he came to see me one Saturday. He looked exhausted. He said he had read the messages. He had gone through some of the old paperwork himself. He said he finally understood that I had not planned any of this. I told him I never wanted to take his grandson away from Rachel. He said he believed me. Then he admitted something else. He had always assumed that because I was financially stable and responsible, I could handle whatever happened. I told him that was part of the problem. People kept assuming I could absorb more because I rarely complained. He looked at the floor. Then he apologized. It was the first real apology I had ever received from him. Court eventually formalized the arrangement. I was granted legal custody. My sister received a structured visitation schedule. She had the ability to work toward greater parenting time if she showed consistency over time. My lawyer explained that this was not about permanently punishing her. It was about protecting the child from another sudden disruption. Financially, things were complicated. I had spent years paying for everything. There were no magical reimbursements. No dramatic check arrived in the mail. The legal bills alone were painful. I had to cut back on some things. I postponed replacing my car. I stopped eating out as much. I pulled money from savings. I was angry about that sometimes. Then I would look at my nephew doing homework at the kitchen counter and feel guilty for being angry. Both feelings could exist together. That was another thing I learned. You can love someone and still resent what their situation cost you. You can want to help and still wish you had never been put in that position. You can care about your family and still need distance from them. My sister's relationship with my nephew improved slowly. That surprised me. I think the structure helped. There were fewer broken promises because she was working within an actual schedule. She started showing up consistently. She got him birthday gifts that were appropriate for him instead of trying to buy years of missed time in one package. She asked him about school. She learned about his interests. She began building a relationship based on who he actually was instead of who she wished he remembered being. I supported that. It was uncomfortable sometimes. There were days when I wanted to be angry, but my nephew deserved a mother who was trying, even if that effort came late. My relationship with my sister never went back to what it was before. I do not think it ever will. We still have disagreements. We still see each other at family events. Sometimes things are surprisingly civil. Sometimes they are tense. We have learned to keep certain conversations private. She knows I will not allow anyone to use my nephew as a messenger. I know I cannot control her relationship with him. That has been healthier. My parents also changed. They stopped calling me selfish. They stopped discussing the custody case with relatives. My mother became more involved in my nephew's life again, but with clear boundaries. My father still struggles to apologize. He prefers to show it through actions. He started helping with practical things. He paid for my nephew's driving lessons later on. He came to his games. He stopped making comments about who counted as the real parent. That last part meant more to me than he probably realized. The hardest part of everything was not the court. It was realizing how close we came to making an already difficult situation worse. For years, I thought stability meant pretending things were fine. I thought keeping the peace meant not documenting problems. I thought love meant trusting people to do the right thing eventually. I was wrong. Sometimes protecting someone means doing things that make people angry. Sometimes keeping a record is not about preparing to attack somebody. It is about protecting yourself from a future version of the story that no longer resembles the truth. I also learned that children notice absence. Adults can explain away missed birthdays. Children remember waiting. They remember promises that never happen. They remember which car pulls into the driveway. They remember who helped with a science project at 10 at night. They remember who was there when they were sick. I used to think being a parent was about making the biggest decisions. Now I think it is mostly about being there for the small ones. The lunches, the homework, the dentist appointments, the boring grocery trips, the rides to practice, the forgotten permission slips, the bad report cards, the random conversations in the kitchen. That is where the years happen. That is where a child decides whether a person is safe. My nephew is 14 now. He is still living with me. He still calls me dad. Sometimes he calls me by my first name when he is annoyed. That makes me laugh. He is taller than me now, which I did not appreciate because he keeps stealing my hoodies. His mother is still in his life. Their relationship is imperfect. Some weeks are better than others. There are still things they have to work through. But there is no longer a question about where home is. He knows where his school is. He knows where his room is. He knows who will be there when he gets sick. He knows that if he calls me at 2 in the morning, I will answer. I think that is what he needed more than anything. Certainty. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had simply handed him over the first time my sister demanded it. Maybe things would have eventually worked out. Maybe they would have fallen apart again. I will never know. What I do know is that I would have been gambling with a child's stability based on an adult's promise. I could not do that. I also wonder what would have happened if I had formalized everything years earlier. That is the part I regret. I should have sought legal advice sooner. I should have documented expenses. I should have protected both of us with paperwork instead of assuming family relationships were enough. I should have realized that good intentions do not replace clear agreements. But I also refused to spend the rest of my life punishing myself for not predicting a future that I could not see. At the time, I thought I was helping my nephew until his mother got back on her feet. Then one day I realized years had passed. That is how quickly a temporary decision can become your entire life. There are still people in my extended family who think I handled things badly. There are people who believe I should have stepped aside sooner. There are people who think my sister deserved another chance without court involvement. I do not argue with them anymore. They did not live in my house. They did not watch an 8-year-old wait by the window. They did not hear a child ask whether his mother was coming this weekend. They did not sit in the parking lot after another missed visit and try to explain something they did not understand themselves. They did not stay awake worrying about whether a 14-year-old would suddenly lose his school, his friends, his room, his routines, and the only stable home he had ever known. I did, and I would make the same decision to protect him again. I just hope that if I ever face something like this again, I do it with better paperwork. The strangest part is that my nephew does not seem to care about the legal victory. He does not care about the court documents. He does not care about who technically had which right at which time. He cares that he did not have to leave his bedroom. He cares that he got to finish the school year with his friends. He cares that his mom is around now. He cares that his grandparents apologized. He cares that everyone finally stopped asking him which side he was on. And honestly, that is enough for me. I started this whole situation thinking I was protecting a little boy from instability. By the end, I realized I was also learning how to protect myself from people who confused sacrifice with permission. I never stole my nephew. I never took him from his mother. I never told him to hate her. I never asked him to choose me. I simply stayed when someone else left. And after years of being the person who quietly cleaned up the consequences, I finally understood that staying did not make me the villain. It made me the adult who was there. That is not something I feel triumphant about. Mostly I feel tired. But when my nephew comes downstairs late at night, opens the refrigerator, looks at the leftovers, and asks whether there is anything good to eat, the whole thing suddenly feels very simple again. He is home. I am here. And for the first time in a long time, nobody is pretending that either of those facts is up for debate.